This pilot is about carbon in forest management plans. And the main objective of the pilot is to investigate the conditions and possibilities of including carbon storage and sequestration in forest management plans. A little bit about the background to the pilot. I mean, the big picture is that climate change, of course, all of us have heard a lot about climate change, and the forest is important in that sense. I mean, for carbon storage, but also for the products that are produced, like by energy, buildings, packaging, paper. There is a lot of products from the forest and also a large carbon storage in forest. And one idea is for this pilot is to see that we can support private forest owners' management of forest related to carbon in the forest management plan. I mean, then the forest owner can show sustainable management connected to carbon, not only management connected to growing stock, tree species, and so on, but also the buyers that they can also show this is what happens with the carbon in the forest. And rather lately, I've been reading this sustainable finance and European Union taxonomy. I will just show you a very short summary of this one because I think it's partly connected to the pilot. This is, you can read if you Google on this one, Annex 1 in this, it's a PDF document, 200 pages. But anyway, the one thing there is to be able to get investment support for forest, then you have to ensure that carbon stocks and sink levels in the forest are maintained or strengthened over a long term. Long term in this case is 30 years. And also it's associated to business as usual practices. That means that maintained, it's connected to business as usual. If you're maybe harvesting more than business as usual, you reduce the carbon stock or the other way around. And all carbon pools should be included. So it's deadwood, litter, soil, below ground biomass. And the suggestion, and I think it's more or less decided that this should be done for forest estates larger than 13 hectares, so it's rather small forest estates. And this has been criticized from at least Sweden, I don't know Finland, but, because first of all, why 13 hectares? Yeah, in Central Mid Europe, most forest owners don't have to do this because the forest estates are a lot smaller than 13 hectares, not in Sweden, for instance. And long-term period, my opinion, is this a long-term period? I mean, in northern Sweden, a rotation period is maybe 100 years. So, but this is something really new, but it's connected to carbon also. And it's mentioned, the forest management plan is mentioned in this Annex 1 several times. But back to this carbon reporting, who could it be of interest for? Of course, for the forest owner. I mean, the interest forest owner can use as a decision support. If you do some activities, thinning, finer felling, you can see how much carbon is in the forest, how much are you harvesting of the carbon. But also timber buyers that normally offers the forest management plan as a service to the forest owner can, if they include this, I mean, if there are a demand, they can include this rather easily. I come back to that as a communication tool. But also producers of timber like sawmills, they can show that, well, we are using timber and it's including carbon, but it's a kind of carbon chain. It's a product also that is growing, renewable. And as I showed you, authorities and investors The idea with the European Union taxonomy was that if you should be classified as sustainable, then you have to show that this is sustainable for carbon. So when I was thinking about this, about the carbon in forest management plans, I was looking at these four you can say types of carbon. Carbon in trees in the forest above ground. That's the normal what we're talking about, the growing stock. But we also have carbon in stumps and roots and forest soils also. And if you make some cuttings and you deliver timber and pulpwood, it's wood products, harvest wood products. It's not the case that all the harvest wood products goes directly, is burnt, for instance, and go directly as carbon dioxide to the atmosphere. It's also storage in harvest wood products also. And this is also much discussed, the substitution effects, if you're using wood instead of something else that is based on fossil fuel, for instance. So what is needed to include carbon in forest management plans then? Well, the main idea I've been thinking about is that you should not add some more data to the plan. A current forest management plan should be able to be used without gathering more data. That's the main idea. Then it's needed models and or conversion rate from volumes to carbon, because I mean most of the the growing stock is expressed as volume per hectare, volume in different tree species. So they have to transfer it from volumes to carbon with models or conversion rates. But also if you're making harvesting in the forest, then you have to go from volume to assortments, because it differs. If you make early thinning, most of the volumes will be pulpwood, and then it will not be stored as long as if it's a lot of timber when you're harvesting. So they need some data from volumes to assortments if you're making cuttings, and also data about the harvest wood products, for how long time it will be stored in a wood product. One example is that paper, for instance, it's calculated that after 2 years, half of the paper is going back to the atmosphere. I mean, it will be burnt, but half of the paper after 2 years, the half time life cycle is 2 years for paper, but it's about 35 years for timber. So it depends on which products, which assortments. Then you can have even more detailed emissions data related to management if you have harvesters and forwarders that are taking out cutting the forest. And also, if you have forest management plans, you need some software development to put these models into the program. Also an interface and how to present it so it's understandable for the forest owner and for the other users. It's connected to training of providers of the plans and users of the plans. A typical forest management plan is that the outline is that you have a map with compartments. You have forest data for the compartments with data for the growing stock, target class, tree species distribution, diameter, and so on, but nothing about carbon. That's not the case today. And you have treatment proposals for the next 10 years. It's the standard in Sweden that you get proposals from the one that makes the plan, a proposal of different types of cuttings or regeneration or so on. And also more or less all the forest management plans, they fulfill the requirements for FSC or PEFC certification. And then you need the management goals and also classification, which areas should be set aside. It's at least 5% of the area should be set aside. These certification rules change a little bit over time. There is new ones for FSC, for instance. But it's also demand on broadleaf trees. But there is no demands on carbon in this case, that you have to report how much carbon do you have in the forest and so on. So that's not the demand from the certification side, you can say. So what I've been outlining here is how to include carbon reporting and the different alternatives. The simplest one that you're only looking at the forest, the growing stock today, and after 10 years, that's and see what is changing. How much carbon do you have today when you make the plan? And after 10 years, if you're following the treatment proposals, and then how much carbon do you take out from the forest? The harvest volumes is transferred to carbon. That's the basic alternative. But the next alternative, then, I mean, if you make these harvest volumes, in this case, it looks like it goes directly out in the atmosphere. But if you have data on harvest wood products, if you make final fellings and a lot of timber, then a rather large share of the product is after 10 years, it's still a carbon sink. It's in buildings and so on. So you can report that based on what you're doing in the forest. Then you can also add this below ground carbon. This is a bit more tricky because if you look at the forest data gathered today as an ordinary plan, you don't measure the soil carbon. It's not very easy to do that. But there are models that estimate the soil carbon, the same for stumps and roots. This is a really large storage in the forest soils with carbon. But I think one problem is that if you look at 10 years changes of the soil carbon connected to management activities, I think it's rather weak connection. If you make a thinning, does it have an influence on the soil carbon or not? Maybe not very strong connection between the soil model and the carbon content. Then the all-inclusive alternative, or what you can call it here, you also put in figures on if you're making harvesting or pre-commercial thinning and so on, then you have some emissions related to management. That can, of course, it could be important, but then it's this one, I mean, are you using diesel with biofuel or not, for instance? That could be have an influence on the emissions. So it can be a little bit tricky to get these figures in the plan, and it depends on a little bit who is doing the management. It's the same for the harvest wood products. If the timber buyer are a sawmill, they maybe use more of the stem for making saw timber than if it's a pulp mill that buys it more, buy the timber. So this is the different alternatives, and there are, So this is an example. I made the calculations for a small forest estate, just to see. This is how it can be presented. Growing stock or carbon stock, it should be here. This is the total for the forest estates is about 30 hectares, ton per hectare, distributed on tree species, and also this is the sequestration of carbon if management proposals are followed, 44 tons per year. But then you take out for the harvesting the next 10 years, you take out 435 tons of carbon. You can translate it to carbon dioxide if you want to. But anyway, here you can see 44 tons per year for 10 years it will be 440. So it's a little bit higher carbon sequestrations even out the harvesting in this case, because the growing stock is increasing a little bit. But this is only on the forest level. We don't care about what happens with this part here. If you look at harvest wood products here, this was the growing stock was increasing a little bit here, but it's still after 10 years of these, can go back again, 435 tons here, it's still 187 is stored in buildings, for instance, because part of this harvesting was timber and used for constructions, for instance. So it's more harvest wood products after 10 years what have been cutting. One problematic thing is the harvest wood products, if you go 10 years further on, this will decrease a little bit, of course, because then it will be part maybe of the buildings will be not there anymore, and it will be burnt maybe for energy purposes and so on. You could also present figures on substitution effects, but this is, I have been looking some in the literature, and this effect per cubic meter, you can find many figures of that. How much is the substitution effect? It differs a lot. So this is also heavily debated. Is there a substitution effect? How big is it? But then if you look at just this one, for about 470 kilo per cubic meter harvest is a substitution effect. It would be like this effect, that you replace fossil fuel-based energy or buildings or concrete or something with this renewable material. That could be presented, but this is really debated. So the final step of this pilot, or next step, is to the response from this workshop, of course, and finalize the report with more details about how to calculate these conversion rates, models that can be used for soil carbon and so on, and also what training is needed, because the forest owner, if you see the figures, there should be good documentation and good guidelines. What does this mean? Because it's most forest owners, they know cubic meter, maybe they know volumes, but they are not directly into carbon dioxide emissions and so on. But I think people learn fast because it's a lot of discussion about this. So I stop there. Thank you.